In 1805, the armies of the brilliant military strategist Napoleon swept across Central Europe. They shattered the power of Francis II and brought an end to Germany's First Reich. Just 10 years later, in 1815, in the small northern German town of Schönhausen, man was born into a traditional aristocratic family. This man would go on to create the Second German Reich. Western historians know him as the Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. Now, this political titan is usually remembered as cold, severe, and intensely conservative. But behind that imposing 6-foot frame was a side to him that most people never knew. He was an absolute unapologetic gourmand, a man with an insatiable appetite, a true glutton who feasted without limits. Growing up in a rural part of Prussia, Bismarck was surrounded by plain, unappetizing food. This seems to have planted a seed, because as an adult, his desire for incredible food exploded into an unstoppable craving. We have some pretty wild examples of this. During the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, while Bismarck was on the march with the army, his menu was anything but basic. We're talking mushroom omelets, roasted pheasant with sauerkraut, turtle soup, raspberry jelly, and even an entire wild boar's head. And when the Prussian army was closing in on Paris, Bismarck went to inspect the 103rd Infantry Regiment. At dinner that night, the man just did not stop eating. The menu included sardines, caviar, all kinds of sausages, boiled beef and lamb, and macaroni. One of the officers with him wrote with a sense of awe that it was like Bismarck was determined to eat until he was forced to stop. On top of the binge eating, Bismarck was also a heavy drinker. It might have been his way of dealing with chronic insomnia, but he became heavily dependent on alcohol. He would start drinking large amounts of wine right from breakfast, and before going to sleep, he'd down a belly full of German dark beer, hoping to knock himself out. But this kind of lifestyle, eating and drinking like a man possessed, even a mythical beast couldn't handle that kind of load. Finally, one day in 1880, after drinking heavily and then wolfing down 6 eggs slathered in butter, Bismarck began vomiting uncontrollably and slurring his words. This was the first attack of the stroke that would eventually claim his life. After that, famous doctors from all over Europe tried to persuade him to stop his extreme eating and drinking, but Bismarck would react with almost hysterical defiance. Only one person ever really got through to him. A young 32-year-old doctor named Ernst Schwenninger. Schwenninger actually earned Bismarck's trust, and using a systematic approach, reducing portions, limiting carbs, increasing exercise, and controlling his water intake, he helped Bismarck drop nearly 27 kilograms, or about 60 pounds, but it didn't last. A few years later, Bismarck was dismissed from power by the new Emperor Wilhelm II in Leon-Lackingen, ending his nearly 30-year career as chancellor. With the support of power gone, Bismarck's spirit and his stomach quickly felt empty again. After a few quiet years, he suffered another major stroke in March of 1898 and never recovered. He passed away 4 months later, on July 30th, at the age of 83. The Second Reich that he had built would crumble into dust in the fires of World War I, less than 20 years after his death. But ironically, the incredible dishes and famous foods that this old foodie had loved, they gained a legendary status, thanks to his seal of approval, and their fame has endured ever since, and that is what we're going to dive into today. As a diplomat who knew at least 6 languages, Bismarck was a master of words. In politics, his most famous line was delivered to the Prussian parliament in 1862. The great questions of the day will not be decided by resolutions, but by iron and blood. But he also had a great line for the dinner table. He once said, "If herring were as expensive as caviar, it would be held in much higher esteem." And among all the foods Bismarck loved, pickled herring was undoubtedly one of his absolute favorites. This dish, made by lightly curing fresh herring in salt, then soaking it a second time in a brine mixed with bay leaves, onions, allspice, and pepper, is popular all across Central and Northern Europe. And every region has its own unique twist. In Sweden and Norway, for example, they prefer herring caught during the spring spawning season and use a low-salt fermentation method. This gives it a pungent smell but a soft texture that melts in your mouth. The Dutch style, on the other hand, uses young herring caught in early summer. Because it's high in fat, the curing method is lighter, resulting in a tender, smooth, and slightly salty sweet fish. And if you go all the way east to Russia, you'll find a national dish where pickled herring is the star. The herring under a fur coat salad. It's a beautiful layered dish of canned herring, potatoes, onions, carrots, eggs, beets, and mayonnaise. But only in Germany does pickled herring have a truly legendary name, Bismarck herring. The story goes that in the 1870s, a herring merchant from the Mecklenburg region wanted to win the chancellor's favor. He sent a specially prepared batch of exquisite pickled herring to Bismarck as a gift. Bismarck tried it, loved it, and even sent the merchant a personal letter of thanks. So the merchant did a brilliant marketing move. He started calling his product Bismarck herring. The name stuck. Now, whether that legend is true or not, the fact that Bismarck loved herring is undeniable. According to records break IC, whether he was at his official residence in Berlin, his private estate, or even staying at the Prussian court, pickled herring was one of his most frequently eaten dishes. And his favorite way to eat it is still popular in Germany today, tucked into a piece of dark rye bread, topped with onion rings and a dollop of sour cream. Later in life, when his diet was severely restricted because of his weight, having a plate of pickled herring was still his most common guilty pleasure. Besides herring, two other items topped Bismarck's list of favorites: eggs and white asparagus. When it came to eggs, Bismarck set a personal record in his youth of eating 11 eggs in one sitting. The Iron Chancellor and our gluttonous emperor seem to have had that in common. Both loved to load up on eggs for breakfast. In fact, in the early 20th century, Italians invented a Bismarck pizza to honor him, topped with cheese and a runny egg. Then there's white asparagus, which Germans call white gold. Because Bismarck loved it so much, a special dish was born, Bismarck asparagus. It's simply boiled white asparagus drizzled with melted butter or hollandaise sauce. Now, the best German white asparagus is only available from late March to early April. So whenever the season ended, Bismarck would get famously moody and irritable for a few days because he couldn't get his favorite vegetable. Everyone around him just got used to it, calling it Bismarck's little spring tantrum. Among all the Bismarck-branded foods in Germany, the Bismarck steak might have the most interesting story of all. Again, this simple rustic dish, a thick-cut, medium-rare steak, topped with a sunny-side-up egg, wasn't invented by Bismarck himself. It just got its name because he loved it so much. But the most fascinating story about this dish takes place long after his death during World War II. It involves a German armored cruiser called the Admiral Scheer. Launched in 1933, this ship was a beast, 15,000 tons, a top speed of 28 knots, armed with 6 massive 11-inch guns, and an innovative all-diesel propulsion system. It was the perfect ship for long-range missions hunting enemy merchant vessels. On October 27, 1940, the Admiral Scheer slipped out of port and headed for its hunting grounds in the North Atlantic. After a few unsuccessful attempts on December 8th, the ship got incredibly lucky. It captured an Allied refrigerated ship, the Duquesa. On board was a jackpot: 3,000 tons of frozen meat and 14.5 million eggs. For a raiding ship worried about supplies, this was a gift from the heavens. Suddenly, the problem of rationing food was completely gone. And so, the Bismarck steak, a simple combination of meat and eggs, became pretty much the main course on board. Morale skyrocketed. The crew of the Admiral Scheer went on a tear, roaming the Atlantic and Indian Oceans for another 5 months, sinking or capturing 17 merchant ships in total. The mission set German records for time at sea, distance traveled, and ships sunk. When the ship returned home, the commander-in-chief of the German Navy himself, Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, came aboard to award the ship's captain the Iron Cross. After the ceremony, Raeder was invited to lunch. And since there were still plenty of supplies left from the Duquesa, the cooks went all out and made Bismarck steaks for the entire crew one more time. And because they were back in port with no worries about future supplies, they went crazy with the eggs. According to the captain's memoir, there were so many fried eggs, they completely covered the steaks underneath. But the German Navy, gorging on Bismarck steaks, wouldn't celebrate for long. Just 56 days later, the ship that was truly named after the Iron Chancellor, the vessel that carried all of the Nazis' hopes and dreams, the battleship Bismarck, was cornered by the British Royal Navy during its own raiding mission. After being pounded by hundreds of shells and multiple torpedoes, it finally sank into the cold, dark depths of the North Atlantic.